Well, hello and welcome back, everyone. I know you know who I am, so I don't need to introduce myself, Paulette Rigo, again. But just in case you don't know who I am, I'm the founder of Better Divorce Academy, author of #1 best-selling book, workbook, audiobook, and course, The Better Divorce Blueprint, and yes, the host of yours truly, the Better Divorce Podcast. Today we've got a special guest, and she's way on the other side of the ocean in Australia. Love her accent, and I have a warm affinity for Australians because Kate Steed is my editor and publisher, and she lives in Australia too. So without a further ado, I just want to give a warm welcome to Gabriella Pomare. She is a dynamic guest. She's a family lawyer. She's an award-winning author of The Collaborative Co-Parent, love that name, and host of Before It Breaks podcast, media commentator, and a global thought leader on modern relationships, co-parenting, and family dynamics. So welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you're here, Gabriella.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Thank you. And your publicist found me, and here we are. And I just love that the world is getting smaller, not bigger. Well, literally, figuratively, shall we speaking. So today's conversation feels incredibly timely for many reasons because I experience this myself, but I do see that modern relationships are changing faster, like at the speed of light, than most people know how to emotionally process them. More couples are sleeping separately, taking solo vacations, keeping separate spaces, and I don't just mean, toothbrushes, and living more independently than ever before. Excuse me. But here's the question nobody asks honestly enough. Is this a healthy independence or interdependence, I like to think of it, or the quiet beginning of emotional separation? Now, Gabriella was featured in The Guardian just 3 days ago, and the article is called A Divorce Lawyer on Signs of Relationship Breakdown, one of the biggest red flags when you no longer argue. So let's just jump right into that conversation, Gabriella. Tell us about the meat of the article. So everyone go to The Guardian, you've heard of it, and put in her name and make sure that you read it along with us. But let's start right away with that. What is the article? Because I'm resonating so much with this.
And so was I, and it's such an interesting concept. It's something that we're really seeing a lot these days. And
Mhm.
sometimes you hear about it with the notion of quiet quitting or the silent divorce. And it is
Yeah.
exactly what you said. It's space. And that might just mean sleeping in separate bedrooms, which I don't criticize because there are reasons for it. I mean, if you've got a partner or a spouse who snores, I can very much respect that if you've got a new baby. But there are other reasons too. People start sleeping in other bedrooms, or they might have two homes. I mean, you see it in the US, we have it here in Australia. You've got the country home, you've got the beach home, and then you've got couples who start spending more and more time.
Mhm.
One person might go to the country home for a couple of days a week, and the other stays in the city. Then you've got, we see a lot of men, usually some women, who take the city apartment. So they'll say, Monday through Thursday, I'm going to go and sleep at the city apartment. Helps with my meetings. I can get to those after work drinks, and that can cause problems in itself. So it's this idea of how much space I think is too much space. Are we still leaving open, communication? What is really going on with a couple before this starts happening? And I'm so interested in this concept.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back. Was it a year ago or so that terminology of quiet quitting became
Hmm.
the new catchphrase, right? I know Webster's dictionary adds in new words every year, and I think it might have been one of them.
It
But
might have been true.
along with gaslighting and all the others that have over the last 10 years. But yeah, it's really a phenomenon, right? Of this sort of. I like to think of it as: have you ever walked in a space, an office, a conference room, a hotel room,
Hmm.
somewhere maybe you shouldn't have been accidentally. You didn't do it on purpose and barge in like some sort of, tidal wave, but you're like, wait, I don't even, where am I? I think I'm in the wrong place. And instead of going, oops, sorry, and making a big deal about it, you kind of tiptoe out of the room. I could tell you a story about a
Absolutely.
wife who walked in on something she shouldn't have walked in, and she did just that. So, but it's sort of that energy, right? Of like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not going to make a big deal. There will be no fireworks. There's no neon sign. I'm not going to curse and, throw things. I'm just going to be very subtle, under the
Mm.
radar, kind of, it isn't sweeping it under the rug and pretending it's not there. It's a different energy, right? But it is that kind of, oops, I'm going to slowly back out and see if this it maybe isn't noticed, right? But
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
as you said, and in the article, is it really the quitting of wanting emotional space, of mental
Mm.
exhaustion, or maybe overstimulation, or parental burnout, constant digital access, women carrying more of the invisible labor in the home, right? Or the independence becoming more, there I go again, frog, the independence of survival, right? Just basically getting through the day. Or, which, we've all been there where you're overloaded and perhaps have a lot on your plate, with holidays or birthdays, or there's a death in the family, or like I said, a baby, or, life happens. But on the regular, that isn't the case, right? Or versus, are you really trying to step out of the marriage in a
Mm.
way in which you're looking to kind of live independently or interdependently, right? And that's a hard conversation. I do also discernment counseling, and I did a session with a couple last night, and I realized, without saying that to either of them, that they really are in very different places. Once one party has sort of checked out in a way, right, quietly quitting, then it really is more than just space being the new luxury.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think they're two very different concepts because what I see, and I say younger couples more, is the idea of this quiet quitting. And I just think it's a distraction. It's that we're so caught up in modern life and social media and scrolling Instagram. So you get home, you've got one person on the couch, they're scrolling, you've got the other one who might be watching Netflix or they're doing their work emails. And there's a complete disconnect. And it might not be necessarily because they're choosing that disconnect, but it's almost a lack of care. It's we are so caught up in our own worlds and what's going on outside of our home that we have stopped putting the effort into our relationship at home. And then I see the opposite, which is perhaps people who have been together a lot longer marriages, longer relationships, where, as you said before, they're craving that independence. And that is why I think sometimes one person does choose to spend some time outside of the home. And it's not always sinister. I know we make jokes, and I agree. You've got the hotel rooms, you've got the city apartment, and we know what goes on. But I do genuinely think a lot of the time people need that space, and that can keep a relationship or a marriage healthy. I mean, I know I work incredibly long hours and I've got two young kids. We call it a country home down at a little farmhouse. And my partner will go, on a Thursday, come back Saturday or Sunday. Not every week, but I don't mind the space sometimes. It gives me time to sort of have my independence of, okay, I want to work on whatever it might be this week, or my one-on-one time with the kids, or I can just have, one of those long showers where no one's timing me, can wash their hair, do everything I need to do, and I'm just not worried about this other person. And look, I don't know if it's healthy or not, but it works. And it helps us then come back together after that couple of days and say, hey, we missed each other. It's a reminder to keep putting that effort in.
Yes, and you've illustrated that beautifully. It's very healthy for couples to have separate time to breathe, expand, grow, learn, and just kind of be with themselves, catch up on maybe some tasks around the house or catch up on some tasks at work or just take a little
Mm,
nap. But it's different when it comes to the return, right? If there's
absolutely.
that coming back together of what I call the return test, right? Or that's not a phrase I've invented, but there is that. I always ask, is it about leaving or is it about what happens when you come back? Do they return softer or are they
Hmm.
resentful? Is there
Yeah.
the absence that's restoring desire? Ooh, I missed you, and you're hugging and kissing and like, don't leave me, and I missed you. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Or is there this exposed disconnection? It's tricky, what does that really look like? And that may be leading to a deeper conversation where it's not just once that's happened, but it's happened time and time again. Where maybe we just keep it going back, like in the boxing ring, we stay in our corners. We don't come into the
Hmm.
middle. We stay. You stay in your zone. I'll stay in mine, and maybe we pass like ships in the night in the kitchen, No?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I speak a lot about that, and you were entirely right about the return test. I actually did a podcast episode on it a few weeks ago, and you're entirely right in that I think the more often that you take that space and that independence, and if you feel absolutely controlled, you need to come back, but you don't really want to be back. I think there's your answer that there's more going on in this relationship. It's not just the
Yes.
need or the thirst for independence. But if
Yeah.
you do finish your couple of days apart and you are so excited to see this person at home and you feel renewed and re-energized about your relationship, then I think it's working for you. So it's really about working out what is happening. It's interesting.
Yes, I'm nodding if you're listening to the video. You're listening to the audio, right? Yeah. It's right because the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. You can tell when it's not, I'm angry with you, I hate you, I despise you, all the other list of horrible things people can say when they're in the heat of anger or resentment. But when they really just stop caring, where there's a sense of
Mm,
apathy, right? Not really caring. Where are you going? They don't even ask. I don't know. Does it matter? Or they saying in their head, none of your darn business. They may not say that. It's more that
mm,
under said, I'm going to do my thing and don't ask me because I'm not interested,
mm.
you know, which kind of leads to this concept of like a soft launch separation. No, is it really a matter of Friday night you're hanging out with the guys? I'm going to go play mahjong with the girls, or you go to a conference on the weekend. I'm going to stay home and, like you said, shampoo my hair and do my nails and I don't know, sleep, right? Whatever. But is it really a silent divorce where you're living parallel lives, where there's a functional roommate? I like to call it roommate syndrome. It's a question
Hmm,
I
hmm.
ask a lot of people. Are you living as roommates? Is this roommate syndrome, or do you really want to jump into bed together, make out, and cuddle? I don't
Yeah,
know. And I
yeah.
have to stop and think about it. I'm like, I might be onto something. Yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're seeing it so often these days because you are so comfortable living in this home together, but really living completely separate lives. And as we say, one's going about doing their thing and the other doesn't care. And that is the biggest red flag, in my view, in a relationship. As soon as you stop caring what this other person is doing, you're not checking in. I mean, if you go through a whole day and don't text your partner or spouse or don't think, I wonder how they're going today or what they're up to, that's a red flag. And that essentially is the silent divorce because you're together and you're living in the same home, but are you really together? Are you doing it for the sake of, staying for the kids, which you and I would hear all the time? Or is it simply because of finances that it's just easier for us to continue living together? But it's really that lack of caring, that lack of checking in, that I think is the problem. And when people need to start, I say waking up. There's a bigger life out there. It is a long journey, and we need to work out, are we here and are we truly happy? Or is there something else we need to start thinking about?
well, we touched on a few of those early signs, like living basically separate lives. But I also see there's this emotional outsourcing where instead of going to their partner to share a great joy, a job promotion, something exciting, or something sad, perhaps something emotional that happened to you that day. If your partner isn't the one that you want to share the good, the bad, and the ugly with, then that's really outsourcing your emotional needs. And they're not there to fulfill them for you either. So they also get used to not being that person for you, so they stop giving and taking too. It's this kind of a slow evaporation.
Absolutely. It is one of the warning signs, and we see it all the time. I mean, you're getting a promotion at work, but it's not your partner you want to tell, you're calling someone else.
Right.
That's worrisome, right? But you've hit the nail on the head. And something else I think is really interesting is yes, when you're outsourcing your emotion, your communication, your conversations, but I think also when you stop fighting, and that's a really important one. When you stop arguing with the person when there's a source of conflict, that in itself is showing a lack of a care or interest. And that can be one of the biggest warning signs and red flags that you are quietly quitting or going through a silent divorce. Because that in itself tells you, hang on, why don't I care enough to want to argue back? Why aren't I saving this relationship? Why aren't I fighting back? And I think
Mhm.
any sort of conflict can be healthy. Of course, there are certainly unhealthy forms of communication and conflict. But when you are there and you are making the effort and you are standing up for yourself and you are fighting for your relationship, it means you want that relationship. To stop wanting, to engage in conflict, it really tells a different story.
Yes, it's, wanting, do you want to fight to keep this healthy and strong? Or if you basically thrown up your hands and surrendered and let go and said, yeah, it is what it is. As soon as you say in your head, you may not say it verbally, it is what it is.
Mm.
I'm not going to fight for it. I can't do this anymore. Those kind of internal conversations that you have with yourself. And if you're not having those conversations with yourself, that's fine, people. Gabrielle and I are here, not here to convince you that you should be having these conversations.
No.
But if you know someone or you are in this situation or this appeals to you because you're like, gee, I never really thought of that, it's time to kind of reevaluate your marriage, your relationship. You don't have to be married to have these types of issues. In fact, dating is a good time to figure out if this is
I
really an
think
issue
so.
or a pattern for you. So let's turn a little bit to how long people linger in this state of ambivalence, right?
Mm.
Limbo, I like to call it. I like to call it treading water, where they're like, is anyone treaded water? And you're out there like, my arms are getting tired. But you have to keep treading water. I don't know whether, you got to wait for the life jacket to be flown to you or whatever, giving you an analogy here. But if you can tread water for 9 years and not drowned, well, you're one hell of a swimmer. But that's really hard to do in a marriage, right? If you're
Mhm.
prolonging this temporary state of disconnect for a long period of time, then I see it really affects people physically. Their health suffers. They stop sleeping. Maybe they gain weight. They lose weight. They stop misbehaving. Whatever that happens with, all the long list of things people do to avoid confrontation. But is there, an insight that you have about how do couples tell the truth sooner without having to wallow in that disconnect and ambivalence for longer than maybe it's just a few incidents here and there?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to communication, doesn't it? And for me, communication is everything. And I think you need to check in. You need to schedule that communication. And if
Yeah.
you are regularly checking in and you're saying, how are you? How are you feeling? How are you feeling in this
Mhm.
relationship? That should be the trigger point of there's something wrong here. And the earlier you start having those real and honest and raw conversations, I think the earlier one or both of you will start to realize something's going on. And one of two things I think will happen. It gives you the opportunity perhaps of saying, well, we need to repair the return, the repair. We need to start working on our relationship, scheduling communication, scheduling date nights. And I don't mean, big glamorous date nights. I mean, just going for a walk together, holding hands, watching a movie together without our phones. It's just making time for each other. And I personally don't see anything wrong with having to diarize that. If you're leading busy lives, so be it. It's 2026. But I do think that it's important to make time for one another. But if that conversation is leading to we're not happy, one or both of us aren't very healthy emotionally, it's causing all sorts of issues, then that might be a trigger sign for something else. But I think even more importantly, what people really need to be doing is if they're, in a family situation, so we're not only married or in a relationship, but we also have kids, that is, in my view, and I'm very big on this concept and notion, that is when you need to work out what to do because I think staying together and living in this sort of dynamic of the silent divorce or just being in a home and not truly being connected, I think that can be really like an impact on children tremendously because a child learns from what they see at home. They see how their parents interact. Are they holding hands? Do they eat dinner together? Do they talk to one another? Is there a gentle cuddle here or there? Do they actually ask each other about their days? And if they're not seeing that and they're seeing the disconnect and they're living with parents 4, 5, 6, 7 years of disconnect, they're growing up thinking that's normal and it becomes normalized behavior. So when they get married and they have children, that is how they go into relationships, that is how they parent. So I guess if there's one thing that I really want to leave listeners with, it's if you're going to have these hard conversations and they are difficult, but you're facing reality and you're being raw and honest, do it for your kids because they don't deserve to grow up in a life where it's a bit of a fake lifestyle. It's mum and dad are here, but they're not truly together. And although we think we should be staying for the kids, I don't always think that is the best thing.
Yes, I mean, I don't know how it is in Australia, although I probably should know. But there is a big epidemic here in the US of what I call staying together for the children.
Absolutely.
And it sounds very noble and right and righteous, got, the right thing to do. On the other hand, children, depending on their age, unless they're 2 days old, are going to notice the disconnect of the parents. If mommy and daddy are not holding hands or at least snuggling, or I'm not saying they have to make out on the kitchen island and rip each other's clothes off and make mad passionate love on the,
Well, hey.
the living room floor. I'm joking, but I'm sort of not. That's not what I'm saying. But the children feel that like lack of intimacy, connection, and just feeling congruent, when mom and dad are walking down different paths. And I'm going to say 5, 6, 7, they start to notice mommy
Very
and daddy's
much.
bedroom, mommy and daddy's, that's where they cuddle. And if mommy's sleeping in bedroom A and daddy's sleeping in bedroom B, and mommy and daddy go on different vacations, and I'm being stereotypical here, but it could be mommy, daddy, spouse A and spouse B. So if they're feeling that as a child and a teenager, trust me, they know what's going on, that mommy and daddy are just not getting along, then they now are feeling that energy. And it's we're not setting the great role model that we should for what a true intimate partnership looks like, So we
You're
have to
entirely
address
right.
that, and that's one of the things you have to work out with either a therapist, a coach, a counselor, somebody with an acronym after their name, right? So if
Absolutely.
you're struggling with that, please, really think about that, because the damage that I hate that word damage, but trauma, that you may or may not be doing to the children is sooner than you realize. They do notice. So,
Mm.
yeah. Let's shift
Yeah.
the topic a little bit to this. I didn't mean to interrupt it. There's something you want to add to that. Please do.
No, no, not at all. No, no, go for it.
But yeah. So let's talk about, we touched on a little bit about that identity that we have, and particularly with women, although I see it more with men, where they're balancing all these roles, right? Motherhood, fatherhood, ambition, career, striving to break the glass ceiling, all the corporate things, or be an entrepreneur, whatever you are, and caregiving for children. And that is emotionally exhausting. And why women often emotionally leave first. I am seeing that more. 73% of divorces initiated or filed by women, and 2 years is the average amount of time that those women think about it in their own little private Idaho. That's what I call that. That's a B-52s quote, if you know who the B-52s are. If not, it's a funny song. It's called Private Idaho. You'll dance around the kitchen, but in your own little world, and nobody can hear you, but you're thinking it and you're ruminating on, how do I get out? How do I fix this? And there's that loss of identity inside a marriage sometimes, which is why a lot of people start quietly quitting and kind of want to reconnect, or you go to your corner, I'll go to my corner, you live your life, I'll live my life, because I want my old life back. I want a part of me that I lost. They're not necessarily saying they hate their life and they hate their spouse and they hate their children. They usually don't. I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth, but it's that feeling of, I want that piece of me that I lost, right? That little piece of me. And this is the beautiful part that you can do with therapy if you really feel that way. The judge is not interested in that. Most attorneys are not interested in that. No, they're good people, don't get me wrong, but it's not, it's not what they do, So I do see so many women in divorce who lose themselves overnight. They really, I ask them, how long have you been feeling this way? And they sort of, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, or by a
Absolutely.
1,000 teaspoons, right? It's not, we don't just dump the whole swimming pool on them. It's just like one drop of water at a time, right? And resentment is often grief that never found the language to communicate. And coming back to your brilliant point about communication is vital. If your communication skills are dead, you need to work on them, because divorce is not going to be fun, or reconciliation will be impossible or very difficult if you don't have that skill.
I think you're exactly right. And I often say that when people come to see me, and when you are coming to see me in my family law hat and in that role, you're not coming because of one big blow up or one big argument. It is
Hmm.
years and years of either pain or resentment, and particularly for mums and sometimes for dads, it is that invisible labor and the resentment that comes with it of I have been trying for so long, I'm doing so many things, and the other person isn't seeing it, or they're not stepping up to help. And it's come to a point where I can't do it anymore. I may as well be on my own. And I think that really does come back to communication, because had you had the conversation earlier, it might be that it was resolvable. It might be that we could have shifted the labor within the home. We could have shared tasks a bit better. And that doesn't necessarily mean, who's buying the grocery, who's doing nappies and all of that. It could just be asking, can I help out this week? Is there something that I can, take away, one less thing going through your mind to help, ease what's going on? And look, I think the reality is parenthood, motherhood, we know that we are taking on a lot more. And, whether you're working or you're a stay-at-home mum, I don't think it makes a difference. It's not always those physical tasks. It's wondering, who needs new school shoes? What's going on at school? Who's not feeling well? What groceries do we have this week to cook dinner? And they seem like such mundane, insignificant things, but we would know that they constantly take up space in your mind. I mean, I know when I'm at the office all day, sometimes I'm distracted because I'm thinking about, oh God, my son might need something for school, or my daughter's run out of nappies, and it's just finding the time to the 5 minutes genuinely to jump online and do it. And you do often think, why couldn't he just do it? Like, why isn't he thinking about the fact that we're running out of nappies? And look, sometimes he does. But these are the things that people slowly start to resent. And without good communication, it is true. They become bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they turn into conflict, but even worse, contempt. And
Yeah.
for me, and I'm sure you've heard it, contempt is honestly
Mhm.
probably the biggest red flag and the part of a relationship where you will break down. Because once you start to lose the respect for your partner, or it turns into contempt and you really can't stand this person, there is almost no coming back. So if I can say one thing, and I've been through it myself, I went through a divorce at 30, and I work in this area like you every single day. You work on it early days, because if there is any chance of resolve, it's by having these conversations
Yeah.
early.
Yeah, and I find, because I'm also mediating where I'm working with couples, it's a different dynamic, because I'm kind of thinking about what A and B are thinking, and,
Yeah.
not mind reading, but pretty good at it. But on the other hand, I'm working with an individual where I tend to know how they tick more. But the hard part is where they know what they want to say, but they're so afraid to say their truth because they know it's going to
Mm.
break their heart or hurt their feelings. So they avoid it, and I'm not going to say they lie, but they kind of dance around it. They'll kind of come in the back door, the side, and say elephant in the living room that no one wants to say. No one wants to intentionally harm someone. Well, most people don't want to intentionally harm someone. And it's almost easier to avoid conflict and to be
Mm.
evasive than it is to be truthful. So sometimes when you work with a third party, they can help you with discernment counseling. I'm not going to say they're the bad guy for you, but they're able to communicate what you're thinking without it coming direct. It's a more civil, more respectful, and more sensitive way of discussing those little roadblocks there that you have a hard time getting over. So if you find that you really are feeling like you're done, and you just don't have I'm not going to say courage, strength, to say those words, don't sweep it under the rug. There may be an alternative way to do it than just running to court, filing, and, being enemies for the rest of your life. It depends on what you're going through. So, but on a lighter note, we talked a little bit about reconnecting and reconnecting before it's too late. It is important. I want Gabriella and I to give you all, I'm hoping you got your notebook out, everyone, but, a little bit of a solution oriented mindset with this. This isn't doom and gloom. And yes, this is a trend, or this is a I don't know, is a trend the word? Maybe. Yeah, a modality of maybe surviving in a modern world, right? And maybe even thriving in a modern world. So as long as it doesn't cross over to an area where it's damaging. So these ways of reconnecting. Tell me a little bit about what you think works for people. What are these, shall we say, rituals perhaps that work well, or at least people could try if you feel like, oh, I want to reconnect, but I don't know what to do. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable. I'd rather just stay in my room and read a book. Well, what would you suggest are some rituals that they could try?
I think it's really about creating that safe space at home, and you really touched on that perfectly earlier. If we are going to communicate, we have to have a mutual understanding that it's a safe space, and we can talk honestly about our feelings, and they may hurt one another, but we're better off doing it now while we're purposely, communicating with an intention to resolve. Rather than allowing that to turn into an argument and contempt and hatred and all of that, where we're saying things we then can't take back. So, safe space, scheduled communication, and again, communication's a big one. I talk about it a lot. I've got a chapter about it in my book, and I talk about four pillars of communication. And I think this works for whether you're together, whether you're separated, co parenting, or any relationship. It's listen, but really listening to the person. So if you're communicating and you're trying to work out what's going wrong at home, don't just wait for the other person to stop what they're saying so you can jump in, but really sit back and hear what they're saying and digest. And then pause. And I think the power of the pause is the biggest one, because when you actually stop, instead of jumping straight back in and firing in, which only escalates conflict, I think you can really digest and then start thinking about what can I say that will fix this situation or that will be purposeful. And then the other two are reflect, which is obviously speaks for itself, and then respond. And that response is everything. So if people can start perhaps communicating a little bit more like that, I think there can be some resolve. And then, as I said earlier, make time for one another. Like put away the phones, have a rule. I know a lot of households have this idea of when we get home, phones go away. We focus on one another. We say, how are you feeling? How was your day? And genuinely be interested. How was this other person's day? And if it is an issue about, the invisible labor, the load that's going on at home, be honest and talk about where you can be helped, where you can be assisted. Because if you can share those tasks within the home, you'll be happier. I think the other person will almost be happier because they know what's going on. They're trying to work out what's going on in her brain, on his brain. Why is she so miserable? But if I can actually help, then I'm proud of myself too. So I think those things are really important. And I'm a big person, and as you said, I'm a big believer in working with a third party. There is nothing wrong with counseling, with therapy. Go and get that early, because if there's any chance of I don't want to say the relationship lasting, that sounds terrible, but of really being able to work together long term. It's working with a third person who can be, yes, that third person where you bounce your ideas off, where you can speak frankly and openly and honestly with, and who can give you strategies, because it's often those strategies you didn't know about that end up working and save your relationship.
Yeah, and be objective too. Sometimes you don't want to go to a parent or a sibling or somebody that's emotionally involved. It needs to truly be, I don't want to say a stranger, but somebody who is
Neutral.
professional, neutral, right? Be careful of the phrase stranger. You say, hey, I want to tell you all my problems, but working with that neutral third party that can be objective and give you professional guidance. But we talked a little bit about the ritual. I agree. Like find a time, like maybe it's Saturday at 10 o'clock, we're going to play pickleball together every week. Or, Wednesdays at 5, we're going to go take a golf lesson. Or Tuesdays at whatever time, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Put it on the calendar. And maybe you don't have to fill your schedule up with all these busy work, but even if it's a weekly ritual that you have, it's important. And I notice like my couples that have weekly check-ins, like
Yes.
once a month on Sunday we this, or once a week we do that. If they have those emotional check-ins with each other, how was your week? How was your day? Just and mean it. It isn't like how are you? But really truly mean it, because if you don't have any shared experiences, even though you have separate experiences, it will be hard to build that reconnect, right? And the technology becomes a big problem when the technology is the BFF. If your phone and your social media and your whatever it is your go-to escape, that could be a problem. Rebuilding your friendship as well as your relationship is essential to the success of your marriage. So think about rebuilding your friendship. When it comes to that ultimate decision of, are we going to stay married? Are we going to reconcile? Are we going to mediate? Are we going to litigate? Like, you need serious preparation and education. And that belongs at the same conversation, so that you're not making decisions laterally or doing it bilaterally, that both parties feel heard and seen. It's very a slap in the face, shall we say, or a kick in the behind when you are told that your marriage is over. When you don't feel that you have any input to reconcile, that you're just like, listen, I'm done. I don't really care what you think, but this is what I'm doing. That is a very jagged little pill to swallow, as Alanis Morissette sings. So I've had fun with this conversation. I invite everyone to grab The Guardian, and again, her article that just came out 3 days ago, A Divorce Lawyer on Signs of Relationship Breakdown, one of the biggest red flags when you no longer argue. So go ahead and grab that. And I want you to tell everybody, what is the best way to learn more about you and your practice and your book and your podcast? How can they find you and learn more about you and, dare I say, stalk you in a good way?
Thank you.
So they can find you and reach out.
On all the bad places we spoke about today, social
Of
media,
course.
online, but not when you're lying in bed with your partner. When you have some alone time, some independent time, jump online, www.gabriellapomare.com, and there's a lot of great resources on there. I've got some interesting workbooks, some courses as well in relation to co-parenting and high conflict divorce. You can grab a copy of the book, and Instagram at the Gabriella Pomare, and a lot of the podcast and the reels and clips are on there. So I think our communities are beautifully aligned. I think they will learn a lot from one another. So jump on and we'll share.
Yes, beautiful. Please, do reach out to her. She's brilliant. And for anyone listening who feels emotionally lonely inside your relationship, or is disconnected to themselves, or unsure whether space is healing or quietly widening the distance, know this: avoidance delays pain. Don't avoid it. Honesty transforms it. And whether your relationship heals or ends, clarity is always the beginning of peace. It's worth it. So if you need help, reach out to me, Paulette, at betterdivorceacademy.com. And until next time, make it better. I'll see you soon.